The whole MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement that RFK Jr. is spearheading and riding, I'm not sure which is the horse, which is the rider on that, but it has created this tsunami of interest in wellness. And part of that, of course, is diet, is food. And so we've got now people asking questions about forever chemicals and plastics and what's in the food and pesticides and chemicals, and the amount of testing that's being done by people like Children's Health Defense, by people like Moms Across America, those kinds of entities that got enough collateral that they can pay for studies, and they're starting to link up glyphosate with this and 70 vaccines before you're in first grade with that. And they're linking these things up. And so all cultural change, the pendulum has to swing so far to one side till it actually starts to correct. And I think maybe history will bear out, I'm hoping, that this period of time here with COVID and all that's going on, this was where the pendulum swung and it kind of bumped as high as it would go, and it's starting to come back with an awareness. And if that's the case, I think we're going to see pretty big changes in the culture.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. How we doing, Tony?
Doing good, Bear.
You feeling good about 2025?
I like it so far.
Good outlook?
Yeah.
All right. Lots going on, man. Lots going on. Well, we're obviously deep into season 2 of the podcast already, and we continue to get such diverse guests here, and this today is no exception. Today we have Joel Salatin with us. Want to give his bio. Joel is a self-proclaimed Christian libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer, and is globally recognized as an advocate for regenerative farming and local food systems. He's the co-owner of Polyface Farm in Virginia. His operation supplies sustainable products to thousands of families and businesses, and it was featured in The Omnivore's Dilemma in Food Inc. With 15 books and a reputation as a captivating speaker, Salatin combines practical farming insights with cultural commentary, inspiring audiences to rethink food and farming paradigms. Prolific writer and podcast co-host, he champions small farms, sustainability, and innovation while mentoring the next generation of farmers on his multi-generational family farm. So, Joel, without further ado, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's just a delight and an honor to be with you.
I get right into it, Joel, here. And I'm just going to go right at the quote, your self-proclaimed identity of Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. Unpack that for us a little bit.
Sure. So this became a response that I developed for years and years as the non-chemical organic farmer. As you know, most of the people in this movement in that movement have been fairly liberal politically and socially and spiritually, if you will. And I just kind of got tired of when I walked in the room and this is an ecological farmer, organic farmer. They assumed that I was for big government and no charter schools and abortion and the other anti-business, anti kind of things that whole, greeny weeny earth muffin tree hugger kind of mentality meant. And so I said, well, I can either be frustrated at this or I can just, have fun with it. And so I decided to have fun with it instead and develop this, Christian libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic moniker that juxtaposed all these different things so that now once that's given, as an intro, everybody realizes, whoa, this guy doesn't go in a box very easily, and that's what I want, is for people to smile at it and realize, okay, I'm really not a good stereotype of probably anything that you've heard. And so that stimulates conversation and encourages inquisitiveness, which is good.
Yeah, I love that because, I'll be honest, like I think for something like this, there is that stereotype. So for people that might be reluctant to kind of absorb the information that comes from that, as a result of that stereotype, they might filter it out of through their own bias, right? But if it's a guy like you that would personally align with a guy like me, my ears perk up because now it's a different perspective from someone that I align with, with other value systems, right? So I love that you're doing that because you could, get knuckle draggers like me and Tony. And Tony is, he's going to love what you guys are going to talk about because he could go all day on this stuff. So maybe I'm speaking more from me. But I think it allows, your stance to, permeate more, because if you were the tree hugger hippie with a beanie hat on and your flannel and all this, and you're 140-pound dude coming on, like, I probably would filter out a little bit of what you say with like, okay, he's one of those guys. But when you flip that, it's like, okay, well, let's hear what he's got to say. So I love that approach, and I know it's worked well for you.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we love to we wanna know where somebody's coming from. I mean, that's one of the most important things in negotiation, in whatever, warfare, whatever. I mean, the quicker you can size up your enemy, what is this guy? Where is he coming from? The better you can joust. And so having this degree of, of, confusion in my walking in the room, it's actually a bit of a self-defense mechanism on my part, because if everybody I meet, sees the biography and is confused, well, then that puts me on a better position, because I've got a confused person on the other side of the table that I can talk with.
And Joel, is that something, as Bear said, this is a space I've been passionate about for a decade now, just more from a dabbling homestead. So you're a name I came across right away, and your blog is something I consume on a daily basis, and it always gives me a good laugh. And that's where my first question stems from, and it actually relates to that title that Bear just read off, and then you just broke down for us as far as kind of keeping you out of the box. Is your blog, it's obvious right away, there's a funness and a wittiness to it that like comes through. Even if you had never read it before and you read one of them, you would recognize that. Is that something you've always had, or is it as you've kind of found your voice within this kind of field of agriculture? And of course, now outside of that, you could even do politics in a way. Like, is that something you've always had, or did you develop that as you became more and more comfortable?
Well, I guess I've always been a bit of a theatrical storyteller. My dad always joked that at a third grade PTA meeting. Notice my shirt. I'm wearing Eric. So these are we buy these from people that die or get fired on the job. And you can get them for 50 cents down at the uniform cleaner's place. And if they have a name on them, you can deduct them for IRS. IRS lets you deduct the name of a shirt if it has a name on it, but they don't say it has to be your name. So, it could be anyway. I just
I'm
didn't
going to
want
add that to my tax strategy,
Yeah.
Joel. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, I just didn't want anybody to get confused in case they saw my Eric shirt here. Where do I work? I work at Hetzel. Where does this, oh, okay. I'm a janitor. I work at Hetzel Sanitation. Anyway, so where did I find this? So in third grade, my dad and mom go to a PTA meeting, meet my teacher, and the teacher, when as soon as she finds out who he is, she just looks at him, and he never tired of telling this story. He said the teacher just looked at him and smiled and said, "Mr. Salatin, you have no secrets." And so apparently I've been storytelling and lying and making stuff up and being theatrical for a long time, and I think that just comes with the territory. And yes, you're right. As you become more, can we say, comfortable in your own skin, and I've become more and more affirmed and confirmed in my life, seeing how the land has responded, the earthworms, and what we've done here on the farm respond to our protocols. I am far more, compared to what the neighbors are doing, what other people are doing. I am far more confident today than ever that we're on the right track, and that mainline conventional industrial agriculture is on the wrong track. And so that confidence you can enjoy a little bit of levity, when you have a little more confidence.
Yeah, for the listeners, if you haven't seen it already or ever been exposed to it, Google search the Lunatic Farmer blog and subscribe to that, and it's a good one to get in your inbox each morning. But Joel, I would love to. You referenced the farm, of course. Bear that did in the intro as well, and it's of course what you're known for is Polyface Farm. For the listener, can you give a little background on the farm, like when did that begin? And then I'd love for you to unpack too a little bit of what you just said of like, hey, you were doing the regenerative thing before it was kind of in vogue back in the day when it was not being talked about how it is now. So how did you, from a just a farming practices standpoint, how did you, and I won't even say see the future, because these are things that have been principles that have been used for hundreds and thousands of years, but how were you so far ahead of what you would call mainstream when it came to regenerative farming?
Well, I was born a lunatic, so so my grandfather, my dad's dad, was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it first came out in about 1945. A lot of people don't realize it had been about post World War II there, with all those stockpiles of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK, that was used for ammunition. Uh, the war effort paid for the consolidation and the streamlining, the branding, and the mining, and just the efficiency of being able to get, huge amounts of NP and K into the hands of weaponry to make ammunition. When the war was over, well, what do we do with all this stockpile of stuff? Well, that went right into the fertilizer industry, and so the war effort actually paid for a lot of the initial capitalization and branding and development of the chemical fertilizer industry. So at that time there was quite a watershed. A guy named Louis Bromfield. He was a wealthy novelist, and he was up for Secretary of Agriculture, and he was a non-chemical guy. Robert Rodale. Or J.I. Rodale and the Rodale family in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. That's why they started the organic gardening and farming outfit, and so there was a tremendous amount of there was a tension there in the country. It wasn't clear whether we would go chemical or non-chemical. Well, we went chemical, and so my grandfather sided with the non-chemical, and Dad got it from him. I got it from him, and so here we are. So I don't have a conversion story. We just always did this. And my dad was an economist. He was a pencil. He was a tax accountant, and he came to this not so much from um, an ecology standpoint, but from an economic standpoint. He saw the chemical approach as being basically a drug addiction. You have to get more potent stuff. It becomes more expensive. You're on this rat race trying to get ahead of the cost and the adaptation of ecology to these chemicals, and you just can't outrun it. And so he took a completely different approach and said, "Well, let's look at how nature functions." Well, animals move, soil is built with decomposing carbon. Um, uh, Nature likes diversity and doesn't like monocultures. Nature doesn't till, it doesn't plow, and nature cycles everything pretty close. You don't send stuff globally that much. Most things, I mean, there's always been a spice trade and things like that, but generally, you're not sending most of the mainstays of food, around the globe. And so these were basic principles that he started experimenting with and developing with, so that through the first 20 years here, from 61 to 81 here on the farm, it was basically a glorified homestead with a lot of experiments. So when I came back to the farm full time September 24, 1982, I had all this background of experiments, but nobody had made a living on the farm. And I came back and said, "Oh, I want to make a living on the farm." And so, Teresa and I got married. We lived in the attic of the farmhouse, and leveraged these 20 years of experiments. And it took us 3 years before we could, I say, before we could exhale. Oh, okay, we're gonna make it, Uh, but we wouldn't trade it for the world, and we were able to squeak by. And by the end of the third year, we realized that we were gonna actually make it.
And talk us through a little bit, like I know even and I was telling Bear before we came on, within Virginia Beach, like both there was like a little store that carried Polyface Farm meats, but then I know you kind of helped pioneer a model in which you have distribution at, and I don't know how expansive it's gotten to this point. I know you had kind of in the basically DC, Virginia Beach, Williamsburg, the surrounding area, you had a distribution network where individuals could go online, make a purchase, and then there were pickup spots within those communities that they could come and pick up whatever they ordered online. Walk us through the light bulb moment, if it was, or where you landed on that model, because correct me if I'm wrong, it's not as if you were late to that game. Like, you were actually one of the first ones kind of driving into that local distribution network.
Absolutely. We call it the metropolitan or the urban drop point concept. And so it's kind of a hybrid between farmers markets and CSAs and all these things. We looked at all these different platforms, and all of them have problems. And so as the internet came on, so we actually started this before there was an internet, when we were still faxing. People had to fax in orders or call in orders, and the way it started was we had these four women from up in Annapolis, Maryland, and which is 4 hours away from us. You got to, go across the Beltway of DC and then come down here. So it's a little bit of a hike, but they would come about once a quarter and buy a pile of stuff, and and they would call the day before, hey, does it suit you for us to come down? And of course, we always moved everything to accommodate. We call them the Maryland women. And they would come, they would have lunch, on the way down, and stop at a couple antique stores to see if there was something the Yankees had left back in the old days. And then they'd come out to the farm with their coolers and get stuff. And this went on for about a year and a half. And finally, one day, one of them pulled me aside. She says, we got a lot of friends. And I'm thinking, well, I think I'd like to know your friends. She said, and we can't get them to come down here. We give them your price list. We tell them, we'll carpool, all these things, but they say they're busy, blah, 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 blah. What would it take for you to come to us? Well, I didn't want to drive to Annapolis. I want to stay on a farm. I don't want to beat the pavement. And so, in very typical entrepreneurial, intuitive fashion, I just said, "Oh, I don't know, $3,000. You get me $3,000 worth of sales, and I'll come to you." I figured that would shut them up. Well, what I didn't know was that one of those four women, there were three young ones and one older one, and the older one was one of these urban metaphysical gurus. Know thyself. Yin yang. All this stuff. She'd written like 6 books on getting in touch with your inner being. And so she had these classes with her disciples every Thursday night or whatever. And so that week, when everybody came, she says, "Okay, everybody, I've found our food. Here's where you sign up." Everybody signed up. She called me the next day and she said, "We've got your $3,000. When are you coming?" Well, what do? Well, you drive, baby, And so that literally started it, and that has now expanded to, I think, 35 drop points in the Eastern Virginia, in the metropolitan areas, Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, Williamsburg, Eastern Virginia, and Richmond areas. And we service them basically once a month, and everything's ordered online. And so there's no, it's all a la carte. In other words, you can get everything from 1 dozen eggs to a whole beef. And so there's no, we don't pick what you get. You get to pick what you want, and you get it exactly what you want, and you get it on a basis, and you work directly with the farmer. So the truck actually goes right from here to a drop point. We don't go to the doorstep, we go to the drop point, and usually it's at somebody's house. And the beauty there is that these drop points then become points of fellowship, and people find out, somebody lives right over next door that's interested in good food, and you basically develop friendships, and I don't know that we've had any marriages, but we might, over, just coming together over a common goal. So that's kind of how it developed serendipitously from the Maryland ladies.
And do you see that as like, when you kind of zoom out, and I know this is something you don't even have to zoom out to hold a perspective on, is when you look at kind of the big meat, or even just the big ag right now, that kind of where that corporate kind of entity, if you want to conglomerate it into one, sits right now within the United States. Do you remain optimistic, or do you see that type of modeling becoming more and more prevalent into the future? And where do you see the shift kind of happening culturally when it comes to both meat consumption, and then, of course, along with consumption, is how the hell you're buying the meat in the first place?
When we start unpacking that, I think that's where I think COVID was one of the most amazing things that ever happened in this country because it awakened a lot of people. It awakened, and wasn't just COVID. It was the BLM. It was the defund the police. It was inflation, the Fed. All these things kind of conflued to give a lot of people in this country um, a bit of a worry about where we were headed. And if there's one thing that and I actually during that time, I actually got calls from 4 different billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires, who called me and said, ask how do I've got a family. If the wheels fall off, we want a safe place to go. Can you help me find a safe place to go? I called them agrarian bunkers. They were looking for agrarian bunkers, and and so uh, what I learned during that time was, if you're concerned about the wheels falling off, and that can be different things to different people, but um, i i one thing you don't want to be in the city when the wheels fall off. You want to be in the country where you can shoot a deer and drink out of a creek and build uh, something to live in out of wood and leaves. So you don't want to be in the city. The main thing is you don't want to be sick. You don't want to be the one in the back bedroom when everybody's running out the front door say, hey, wait a minute, can you pick up my bed and take me with you? And this spawned just a whatever an explosion in in the wellness community, and along with for the first time a huge mistrust of institutionalized medicine and wellness and sickness. I mean, the trust in doctors went from 70% down to about 32%. I mean, trust in doctors. And so the whole MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement that RFK Jr. is spearheading and riding. Not sure which is the horse, which is the rider on that, but it has created this tsunami of interest in wellness, and part of that, of course, is diet, is food, and so we've got now people um, asking questions about you know forever chemicals and plastics and what's in the food and pesticides and chemicals, and the amount of testing that's being done by people like Children's Health Defense, by people like Moms Across America. Those kinds of entities are paying for they've got enough collateral that they can pay for studies, and they're starting to link up glyphosate with this, and 70 vaccines before you're in first grade with that, and they're linking these things up, and all cultural change, the pendulum has to swing so far to one side that it actually starts to correct. And I think maybe history will bear out. I'm hoping that this period of time here with COVID and all that's going on, um, that this was where the pendulum swung, and it kind of, it kind of bumped as high as it would go, and it's starting to come back with an awareness. And if that's the case, yeah, I think we're going to see some pretty big changes in the culture.
Yeah, it's I looking ahead with Bobby Kennedy. I hope he's able to deliver on a lot of the things he said, and I know Tony and I are excited about what might be coming. And I also look at it too from like a kind of a national defense angle, which might be a little different than how you guys would look at it. But Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, but because don't aren't the aren't there 4 major corporations that control like 90+% of our food supply as a country? And aren't 2 of them foreign owned? Like, are they Chinese owned, or like, you know what I mean? So let's war game that a little bit. Like, imagine if you have a foreign entity. Is it Joel? Do you know? Are they Chinese owned, or is it Brazil?
I think
Or
2 of them are Chinese and then Brazil.
Well, you're in the ballpark, but
okay,
not very far past first base, if you will. So
okay. Well, that ain't good.
so you're in the ballpark. So what we've got is in meat and poultry. Um, 85% is controlled by 4 companies, one of which is foreign owned, and that's JBS. It's a Brazilian company. Um, in pork, I think probably what you're referring to is the largest sale of any U.S. corporation in history was when Smithfield Pork sold to became a Chinese entity. That was the largest transfer of an American corporation to a Chinese one. So now they own Smithfield, which is the largest pork supplier. So yeah, the foreign control in this is serious. But beyond that, look, we've been look what happened when Putin invaded Ukraine, and all of a sudden people found out how much fertilizer was being purchased from Russia in American farmland. The average farmer was buying all this fertilizer from Russia. Morocco is the only big exporter of soft rock phosphate, and so you've got this huge dependency on foreign governments, even for our domestic food production. When all that happened, we just laughed here because we don't buy any of that stuff, and it didn't affect us at all. But the average farmer was on the media, crying, "What are we going to do? Fertilizers jumped 400%. What's going to happen?" And it showed the vulnerability. Yes, you're right. This is a significant vulnerability in the system when you're dependent on these foreign powers. And now we're at 20%. This is the first time in American history this has happened. We're at 20% of our food supply. In other words, 1 in every 5 mouthfuls of food Americans ingest is imported. And we've never been in that kind of position either. I mean, we're shipping whole broilers to China to have them, parted out and then bringing them back as parts and pieces. I mean, it's insane what we're doing and how we're subjecting ourselves to these foreign interests.
Yeah, Joel, something you well, we brought up RFK, and I think it does, like what he's driving towards leaves a level of optimism. But there is a quote and I forget where I pulled it from, that you said that I love too, because I think it doesn't. It's not that it needs kept in check, but I think too, like you see a swing happening now where, and you even mentioned it in one of the blog posts, where all of your organic friends, all these subsidies that they bitched about when it was going towards like big ag or traditional farming, now that the pendulum's swinging, they're kind of have their hand out, and you're kind of calling out that like, hey, no, like now that the pendulum's swinging, like this is about getting rid of them, not you now getting what you think your fair share is. And then the quote, I love it, and I'd love for you to unpack that, but this relates exactly to that, is you said, when people run to the government for a new agency, a new role, a new license, it simply fuels agency capture. We don't need better people in government. We need fewer people in government. And I know you're saying that kind of like, of course, better people in government is needed as well. But I love that quote. So I'd love for you to kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah, well, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so my biggest fear with RFK Jr. and I love the man. Okay, I'm not trying to denigrate in any way, but my biggest concern with him is that we'll simply trade one set of regulations for another set of regulations. And when he says, "Well, I know where the bad guys are, and I'm going to get them out," well, okay, so you get the bad guys out, and you put good guys in, but in 20 years, we're going to be right back where we are because the agency itself is inherently that power corrupts. And so what we need is you cannot have flourishing, thriving small business under the hand of big government. The ability of innovation and creativity that requires entrepreneurial prototypes coming to the marketplace in whatever sector it is. The only way that platform can flourish is when the government is smaller. The more licenses, the more permits, the more regulations there are, the more difficult it is for competitors to the status quo to find a seat at the table. That's a fact. And so yeah, when RFK was at the height of his power as a third party candidate, I was telling one of his members of his inner sanctum, that was a friend of mine, said, you got to love somebody that sued the government 150 times. I mean, that you got to love that. But the problem is his suits are always, I want you to do more. You're not doing. I want you to be more interventionist, and what I would like to see is just eliminate the agency, and let the states handle it, let the localities handle it, because we've arrogated to the federal level the 50 state experiment. And that's why we're at such loggerheads and partisanship in this country, is because we have taken these 50 ideas, 50 different kind of ideas from the states, and we've centered them into the centralized federal government, and that gives us a K Street. If all of our freedoms weren't for sale, we wouldn't have a K Street.
Yeah, I love what you said there. And, the free market will always dictate the most efficient outcome. That's the beauty of capitalism. And anytime the government wants to get their hands in there, it's just going to create unnecessary bureaucracy. And it's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw with the California wildfires, obviously, are still going. Newsom just declared an executive order that gives for 1 year. So like it'll expire on like January 10th of next year, basically less red tape for reconstruction of your homes and all this stuff. So for 1 year, you basically get a free pass. Like, I don't know if it's anything you want to build, but the typical EPA and all these other things you got to go through in California to literally add one room to your house that would take 2 years to get approved, they're waiving. And I kind of laughed. I was like, okay, why did it take a state tragedy to force you guys to enact something that you should just be how it is all the time? You know what I mean? And they realize, like, okay, they're going to have to rebuild 50,000 structures, and if 50,000 applications flood these cities, like it's never going to get approved. So they're like, okay, for 1 year, we're going to just like let it all pass. And it's like, in a way, they should learn something from that, because it doesn't always have to be like that. And we're working on that with the building. We're building in Virginia Beach. We've been at it for like 2 years. We've met with engineers a million goddamn times, and stormwater runoff and all this. And it's like, it just naturally creates this ridiculous clunkiness of getting anything done. And obviously at the federal level, it's that on steroids. So I love what you said, and obviously being able to inspire competitive nature in the space, and an optimal outcome for the market. You're preaching to the choir over here, and hopefully we can see more of that in the future.
Yeah, well, you're right, and we live in a time where a culture of choice. We've got choice in the bathroom, choice in the bedroom, choice in the womb. But think about more intimate things that we deal with. Food, clothing, shelter, and you don't have choice there. I mean, what if I want to go live in build a straw bale house on Malibu Beach? I mean, if I want to build a house, take the risk and build it, why is it any of the government's responsibility to tell me whether it's acceptable or not? If it burns down, blows away, falls down, well, it's my loss. It's not the government's loss. And so we should be able to make the choice for us, and bear the consequences. And so that gets you in a discussion of safety net, and of course I would abolish all government safety nets, all of them, period. And that way people would have to live with the outcome of their decisions. And when you have to when you have to take responsibility for the outcome of your decision, maybe you put a little more attention on making a better decision.
Kind of the healthcare, kind of health insurance industry is one you've spoken a lot about in that exact vein. Would you, and I'm sure a lot view that as controversial, but I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit, and kind of your thoughts surrounding that, and that how that would require then that people take a certain level of ownership over their health if that weren't in place, or if we kind of completely removed it and stopped moving in the direction of it being regulated by the federal government.
Yeah, so right now, I can't practice medicine without a license. And people say, well, you can't have a bunch of quacks out there practicing. Well, the fact is that a lot of the medical system is quackery. It doesn't work, and it's essentially an incentivized sickness kind of process. And so when FDR put caps on wages and employers were searching around for something to try to reward good employees that wasn't a pay increase, they struck on this medical insurance idea that didn't even exist until that time. So here we are with the government intervening in employer employee relations. That should be a strictly voluntary thing. If you want to work for me for this, fine. If you don't, that's fine. Minimum wage, all that interventionist stuff skews and corrupts what could be a nice, simple, uh, you know, uh, negotiation. And so employers started putting, health insurance on, and then that health insurance, of course, aped into other things. And then you had the AMA develop, and if I want to start a hospital, I can't just start a hospital. I've got to have certificates of need and all this, and all this protectionist concessionization developed around the status quo and around the industry to where today, yeah, I just blogged, I think yesterday, I heard a guy say at a conference I just did over the weekend that the worst thing you can own in America is really good health insurance. Because, and I'm saying good health insurance, the kind that doesn't have a deductible and picks up everything, because suddenly you don't make any decisions anymore. You just cast your entire health on an orthodox system that may or may not have your best interests at heart. And so if you have poor health insurance, a big deductible, maybe a medical sharing ministry or whatever, but if you have poor health insurance, then you don't use it every day, and you start thinking about you know how do I build up my immune system? How do I stay healthy? You take a little more, personal responsibility for these things. And of course, now we're seeing it has gotten so bad that we are now seeing whole lists of doctors that are opting out of the system and going to a pay to play, come and pay cash, and just are completely opting out of the system because it's become so difficult. And the interest in alternative medicine, functional, naturopathic, homeopathic, and chiropractic, and acupuncture, iridology, herbalism, all these alternative methodologies is just a tsunami right now as people lose faith in the conventional orthodox healthcare system.
Yeah, that's one that I know I could pick at, and we could go down another 2 hour rabbit hole on. But Joel, one last topic I want to cover and just kind of hear your thoughts on is kind of the what to me from the outside, and actually I shouldn't say from the outside because it's something me and my family kind of have integrated certain practices. We're certainly not a full homestead, but that's something we are definitely like looking to integrate further, and finally have a property where we can kind of make that happen. But it seems to me that in the broader zeitgeist, or like the collective, that there's more and more interest in kind of the homesteading, small farms. Would you agree with that? And then do you remain optimistic of this kind of shift culturally to where people take back ownership of even their own food production, and then which I think will naturally lead to some of the systems that you've created further spreading, meaning people having small local homesteads or farms that not only produce for their own family, but reach a level of efficiency and just production that they can help supply the broader community. So loaded question, but do you agree that it seems to be a growing interest? And then secondary, are you optimistic of what that looks like, let's say 10 to 15 years from now?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most optimistic things happening in our culture right now. In fact, the last book I wrote is the title is Homestead Tsunami, and it's completely about this tidal wave of homestead movement. And there are now homestead fairs, homestead festivals around the country, and they're huge. I go to a lot of them. I'm asked to speak there, but I mean, and these are not hundreds of people; these are thousands of people. I mean, the first one was the Homesteaders of America fair, actually here in Northern Virginia, and Amy Fuel is the founder of that outfit. And I mean, the fairgrounds can only handle, I think, 6,000 people a day, and tickets went on sale January 1, and they'll be sold out by the end of the month for something that's in October. I mean, it's just incredible. the Homestead Festival in Tennessee. There's the modern homesteading in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, with 4,000 or 5,000 people. I'm going to the Okie Homesteading Expo here shortly next month. Going to one in Ohio actually this weekend, up in the Cleveland area. They're all over the country. They're just popping up everywhere. And what these are people who are realizing that self-reliance, that dependency on the government, and especially, if the wheels fall off, I don't want to be in the city. Those kinds of things are developing, and there's a familial aspect as well. I mean, kids, immunological function to be able to get your hands in the dirt. I mean, grandma said you got to eat a pound of dirt by the time you're 12. Finland now leads the world documenting the benefits for your immune system of being in the soil, in the dirt, and touching dirty things. We're not sterile beings, and our immune system is a muscle that needs to be exercised. And so there's a heightened health benefit to actually raising your kids with gardening and chores and cleaning out the chicken coop and things like that. That there's actually huge health and benefits. And then another huge one for kids is self-worth. You go to all these school shootings and the bullyings at school, and every time they interview these school shooters and stuff, every one of them has a terrible self-image. I was laughed at. I didn't fit in. I was, whatever. They all have a terrible, terrible self-image. And so how do you, and of course, teen suicide is at an all-time high. How do you develop, adolescent self-worth to feel good about yourself? Well, I suggest that it's done by successfully accomplishing meaningful tasks. Successfully accomplishing meaningful tasks. And our problem in our culture is we have denied our children being able to successfully accomplish meaningful tasks. We put them on the screens. I'm not trying to denigrate soccer games or whatever, but you ask the average 12-year-old, what skill do you have? What are you good at? And they can't even, if they can put two words together, they can't tell you. And we've denied our children the most basic human element of mastery of something, of skill of something. Do you know how to chop firewood? Do you know how to use a knife? Do you know how to gut a chicken? Do you know how to plant a tomato? I mean, these were all things that kids grew up with chores in years past, that gave them a sense of being needed, of being contributors, and by the time they were 12 and 13, they were good at stuff. They knew how to do stuff. And today we've denied that to our kids, and so they wander around at 15 and 16 suicidal because they never developed anything. And it's not enough to say to Janie and Tommy, you're a good little boy or a good little girl. The obvious question is, well, if I'm good for what? Tell me what I'm good for. And they kids punch through this. They understand this psychologically. Well, I'm not really good for anything. I'm not really good at anything except, the top score getter on Angry Birds. Well, that's, you can be proud of that, but that doesn't give you the self-worth and the confidence to go through life like you have purpose and like you're needed. And so there is a lot driving this homestead tsunami, and it is a sight to behold.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, Bear knows my older brother as well. We grew up having always from 5 to 8 cows that we just raised ourselves and butchered on a 200-acre farm in Southwest Pennsylvania. And we talk all the time. Like, there's pictures of us at 5 years old feeding the cows at 5:30 a.m., each of us carrying the side of a 50-pound hay bale. And I bring that up only because, like, we reflect often that, like, I would not trade that for the world. Like, and at the time we were pissed off little 5-year-olds, like, what are we doing out here? Like, and my dad's laughing. And I think dads get smarter as you get older, but that's one we always reflect on, like, whoa, like baling hay in the summer after we just played a baseball game and those types of things, like what that builds into you. And now with 3 daughters myself, it's like, do I need to do the exact thing? No, but exactly what you just said, Joel, of like the foundational confidence that gives you when you are, and you phrase it as completing meaningful tasks. It's like, that's life in general. It's like even at running a business, what if you can stay focused and complete meaningful tasks, you can make progress as a business. So yeah, what that instills in you, and I love to hear that you're optimistic as it as well, because it gives you such a foundational belief and confidence that I 100% agree. I think we're completely void, not completely, but trending in a direction of being void of, especially in our youth, which just is disheartening.
Yeah, and those empty store shelves in the spring of 2020, listen, that got the attention of a lot of Americans when they went in those stores and saw empty shelves. It uh, scared them, and so a lot of this movement is, I wanna know where my food comes from. I want to know how to produce food, and I wanna stockpile food so that, so you've got, I mean, the market for canning supplies and freeze dryers and all these things are just off the charts. All those businesses are having a heyday right now, and it's been a long time coming, but it's exciting to see it.
Well, and the last thing, Joel, before we sign off, just because I know you're an encyclopedia of information, is for individuals that are maybe just starting or have an interest in starting. Maybe they have just a big backyard or have some land where they can really start to kind of ideate on what a homestead could look like, or even just a simple little garden. Any resources you would recommend to the beginner or those interested in it, just to say, and I know you have a plethora of books, but more on the kind of specific gardening and homesteading front, that you would say, hey, this is a great place to start, or website resources as well.
Well, one of the School of Traditional Skills right now, the School of Traditional Skills does videos and homestead skills type stuff. Modern Homesteading magazine, um, Homesteaders of America also has a magazine. So all of these things uh, bring people. I mean, yeah, there's a whole subculture here, and so what you got to do is, get off your Netflix and and pursue, if this interests you, pursue this with the same passion that you would if you were, trying to figure out how to get off a marooned island if you were shipwrecked. I mean, you would put all of your attention on something. And Dave Ramsey, the economic guru, he says you tend to be successful at what you put attention on, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. And so if you're concerned about, where you are in self-reliance, well, put some attention on it. And you can put in a water cistern, you can put in a garden, you can have, I mean, in my book, Polyface Micro, I have a chapter on how to have chickens and rabbits in a Manhattan apartment. Okay. These things can be done on a very, very small scale. And once you start, you can't Google experience. You just can't Google experience. So starting and putting that first foot forward is a place to establish a beachhead, and then you go from there. But the hardest step to take is the first one. So start with something. It can be anything. Just start. It can be a quart jar of mung beans sprouting on the windowsill. Okay, you start with something, and then let it progress just organically.
Love it.
Tom, anything else?
Joel, anything you'd like to plug before we hop off?
Well, the only thing that I like to kind of encourage folks. A lot of people say, "Oh, come on, I'm only one person," because we all have these little moments of insignificance. Feel what in the world can I do? I mean, whether it's the deep state, drain the swamp, unrest around the world, Vladimir Putin, whatever it is. We just feel small, and I like to encourage folks and help them to understand that wherever we are, whatever we've gotten to today is a physical expression. It's a manifestation of trillions and trillions of decisions that have been made by us and by our predecessors up until today. That's where we are, and and where we'll be in 20 years or 30 years is again going to be a physical manifestation of the decisions that are made between now and then. And so don't ever underestimate the power of a lot of decisions made correctly. And let's just start making proper good decisions. Fund the good guys, defund the bad guys, and let's and in 30 years, we'll look back and say, okay, those decisions did make a difference. I mean, I'm reminded of the little story of the guy walking along the beach and all those, crabs washed up on the shore, and he picked one up and tossed it back into the ocean. And a passerby said, there's thousands of crabs, on the beach. What difference does it make if you throw one back? And the guy said, well, it made a difference to him. And so you can't be responsible for everybody else's situation, but you can do something on your own situation so that you can eventually provide hope and help to a world that is hopeless and helpless.
Perfect thing to close on, Joel. Well, thank you so much. You've been putting out the good word now for decades. So just appreciate both the clarity of mind that you've maintained, but then also just being on the damn mark, because that's important too. It's one thing to be around for decades, but it's another thing for things you were talking about 30 years ago to now see come to fruition at scale. So just appreciate you and appreciate everything you've done and how much you've contributed to kind of the regenerative, but then even just broader audience when it comes to agriculture.
Thank you so much. It's a delight and a privilege to be with you. Blessings on you.
All right. Take care, Joel. We appreciate it.
Yes, indeed. You too.